A William Shakespeare owns some shares in London's Globe Theatre. Several documents show Shakespeare delinquent in his taxes. A tax collector couldn't find him. He's named in some minor lawsuits. The accuracy of this 1595 document, the first and only record of William Shakespeare ever being paid as an actor, has been disputed by scholars. 8 years later, in 1603, King James authorized several actors, including Shakespeare, to start performing plays again after the plague had closed the theaters. But by then, he'd bought a house back in Stratford and was dealing in real estate and grain. No plays, no poems, not a single letter in Shakespeare's own hand has ever been found.
In fact, the only examples of his handwriting yet discovered, the only examples generally accepted, are 6 signatures, each one spelled differently. 3 of the signatures are in his will, the most famous Shakespeare document of all, one of the most famous documents in existence, period. In it, he divides his property down to a silver bowl and a sword, but he makes no mention of any books, manuscripts, plays, poems, or any shares in a London theater. He leaves his wife just one thing, his second-best bed. Written between the lines of the will is a bequeathal of some money for rings to my fellows John Hemming, Richard Burbage, and Henry Condell, who were actors. That's about it. After centuries of the most intensive literary treasure hunt of all time, these are the nuggets. The leavings of a man who seems to have been interested in little except money. Doubters look at this meager collection and see no trace of the creator of Hamlet, Macbeth, Lear, Othello, and the sonnets. They see only a very ordinary man.
But in Washington's Folger Shakespeare Library, the high temple of American Shakespearean studies, Professor Sam Schoenbaum believes that the very ordinary man of the documentary evidence is no barrier to greatness.
Shakespeare, as people have noted, the author of these plays, was also a man among men. Genius is not an occupation that takes up every moment of one's day. The genius has to eat. He procreates children. Occasionally he sleeps. He occasionally uses the bathroom, and so on. It's hard for us to accommodate ourselves to the dual, the multifarious nature of the person who is, as we all recognize, a genius.
The Stratfordians would argue that it's like spontaneous generation. They are like the Christian fundamentalists who believe that life was created bang, like that, overnight, all complete as it is. Just the way the plays of Shakespeare were completed bang in his brain without any background at all. How could anybody have thought that a man who could barely sign his name was the greatest writer in the English language, whom nobody, while he was alive, ever, to the best of our knowledge, ever identified as the dramatist Shakespeare, a dramatist of any kind or any kind of writer?
But the name William Shakespeare was linked to the poems and plays during the Stratford man's lifetime. It was there on 2 poems published in 1593, Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucrece. The name William Shakespeare was on the sonnets when they appeared in 1609. It was on some of the unofficial publications of the plays, the quartos. But the name wasn't spelled the way the Stratford man spelled his, Shakespeare, without an E after the K. And often it was hyphenated, an indication, according to anti-Stratfordians, that people knew it was a pseudonym. While he lived, the definite link with the Stratford man was missing. And when he died in 1616, no one seemed to notice. Until 7 years later, 1623, then the monument was erected in the church. And almost simultaneously, the first folio appeared. This was the first publication of all Shakespeare's plays. Here was the missing link to the Stratford man. In this book, Ben Jonson, who was second only to Shakespeare as a dramatist, wrote a poem to Shakespeare, calling him Sweet Swan of Avon. The name Stratford is also mentioned in the introduction. And there was one more definite link to Stratford in the first folio. Its editors were listed as John Hemming and Henry Condell. Those are the same two actors the Stratford man had mentioned in his will.
Hemming and Condell, his friends and colleagues during his lifetime, who were able to perform this service for him after his death. Well, we have Shakespeare's will. And in his will, as it happens, he remembered Hemming and Condell. But unfortunately, and that is one of the accidents which keep happening to William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon, the references to Hemming and Condell in the will are interlineations by another hand. Isn't that an unfortunate accident, that the link between the actors, who are the editors, or purport to be the editors, of this massive new material, never released before, have apparently been introduced into his will? That, by the way, and having mentioned Shakespeare's will, that is a will in which this great spirit, this man of immense learning and vision, not only bequeathed no books that can be perhaps explained away, but he bequeathed not even the most valuable thing which he had to bequeath, the remaining manuscripts of his plays, which were eventually to be published 7 years after his death. Trouble is, there's a puzzle with which one's confronted. It doesn't run right. Nothing's right.
Enoch began as a classical scholar, and I think he would do better, really, to confine himself to what he knows about. There's no problem whatever about the first folio, except that it was a tremendous big undertaking, which in itself shows you how much Hemming and Condell and all the other people in the company really valued their chief dramatist, the best known, the most popular dramatist of the age. People really rushed to buy quartos of the plays that they could get hold of, but the remaining plays, of course, were in the archives of the company. There's no problem about that at all, and I think we might really allow poor Mr. Powell really to retire upon politics. Though there, too, I gather, he's lost his seat. Don't want to bother about his opinions whatsoever. Doesn't qualify to have an opinion about it.
But nothing about Shakespeare is that simple. No one even knows for sure what he looked like. This portrait hung in a place of honor in Washington's Folger Shakespeare Library, until a close examination showed that it was the portrait of another man who'd been partly painted over. This portrait was owned by King William IV and was once called Shakespeare. It has now been retitled Portrait of an Unknown Man. One by one, the portraits of Shakespeare have proved to be as fanciful as the anecdotes about his life. Art experts now doubt that he posed for a single one of them.
What do you make of the frontispiece, the engraving, the first picture of Shakespeare?
If you have to have a face, and everybody has a face, there is a face. And that is the face of the same design as the face of a monument, the Stratford Monument, to which this book for the first time refers. The first connection between these plays and Stratford-on-Avon, and how convenient that there was a Stratford Monument. Somebody fixed it. And to me, in its wording, in its aspect, in everything about it, that is a fix. It is a fix which was arranged to go with the first folio. The one spoof goes with the other spoof, and it's all part of a spoof of William Shakespeare. It's shocking, isn't it? It's an absolute shocker. Somebody, no doubt, took it into the workshop and said, here, this is what it's to look like. It absolutely stinks.
You don't think that's the face of a man who would write the sonnets?
I don't think it's the face of a man at all. I think it's the face of Anonymous. of somebody who isn't a man, of a mask somebody invented, where there has to be somebody to conceal an identity. I can't put up with it.
When remedies are past, the griefs are ended by seeing the worst, which late on hopes depended. To mourn a mischief that is past and gone is the next way to draw new mischief on.
What I hope will happen is that the true author will be recognized. It is the greatest detective story there ever was. It's the greatest story in literature in my mind, and you can't help getting absorbed in it and excited about it. And furthermore, you can't help feeling its importance. You want the man who conferred the greatest glory on English letters to get his recognition. It's a matter of simple justice.
Just after World War I, an English schoolmaster named J. Thomas Loney set out to find the real William Shakespeare by constructing an exact profile of his man, the way a detective might. There had been many candidates in the past: Christopher Marlowe, Francis Bacon, even Queen Elizabeth. But Loney was looking for someone new, a man of superb education and recognized genius, a man close to the royal court, and a man who had written under his own name before becoming Shakespeare. The search lasted several years.
He came across this little volume of poetry here in the British Library, and in it he found some poems which seemed remarkably similar to the works of Shakespeare.
Framed in the front of forlorn hope, past all recovery, I stayless stand, to abide the shock of shame and infamy. My life through lingering long is lodged in lair of loathsome ways, my death delayed to keep from life the harm of hapless days. My sprites, my heart, my wit and force in deep distress are drowned. The only loss of my good name is of these griefs the ground.
The poems were by Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. At first it seemed that he had written only a few youthful poems, then stopped writing. And yet, literary critics of the period called de Vere one of the greatest Elizabethan poets, and the best for comedy. If he did write comedies and great poems, what happened to them? One of Loney's disciples came across a possible answer in another old book.
This one, The Art of English Poesy, written in 1589, 13 years after de Vere supposedly put down his pen. It says, I know very many notable gentlemen in the court that have written commendably and suppressed it again, or else suffered it to be published without their own names to it, of which number is first that noble gentleman, Edward, Earl of Oxford. Edward de Vere.
Or else suffered it to be published without their own names to it. For Loney's disciples, this was a vital clue. Here they saw a nobleman who couldn't admit he was also a playwright, whose station in life meant that someone else would get the credit for the finest plays and poems in the language.
Or I shall live your epitaph to make, or you survive when I in earth am rotten. From hence your memory death cannot take, although in me each part will be forgotten. Your name from hence immortal life shall have, though I, once gone, to all the world must die. The earth can yield me but a common grave, when you entombed in men's eyes shall lie. Your monument shall be my gentle verse, which eyes not yet created shall o'erread, and tongues to be your being shall rehearse. When all the breathers of this world are dead, you still shall live, such virtue hath my pen, where breath most breathes, even in the mouths of men.